One thing that we're going to start right now with the freehand drawings is we're going to make a very simple title block. So I want you to just guesstimate about, I don't know, 1/2 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch up, and I want you to draw just a straight line. And again, notice I'm putting a couple of lines right there. But finally, the last one kind of made it again even out. I want you to put your name under that line on the left side. And we're going to call this FRE 02A. FRE 02A. So you kind of want something that looks like that. Notice the arc that's coming through on my line, right? It's more space right there. That's that natural arc. That's something that I can do better. Okay. Eye level is what? We talked about this morning. The eye level is the horizon line. In the middle of this sheet of paper, then the space that you have left, in the middle of this sheet of paper, I want you to draw a line straight across your page. And I want you to label it as the horizon line. And maybe about, I don't know, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch in from the border on that line, I want you to draw your vanishing points. So you're going to have 2 points. This one is your left vanishing point, and then left vanishing point and right vanishing point. Okay, so this is the horizon line, and now we're going to draw the vertical horizon. So I'm just going to put a little tick mark where I think the middle of this is, middle bit between those two, and I'm going to draw a line through that middle. And I want you to label that. We're gonna abbreviate it as Verizon.
Verizon the V?
Yes. Like the mobile cellular company. Okay, so this morning on your exercise, the cube that you drew was at 45 degrees to the picture plane, right? Just really quickly up here in the corner, I'm going to block off a portion of this drawing. You don't need to draw this, but I just want to make sure everybody understands what we're doing. This is my eye. I'm looking that way. Here's the picture plane. We're going to draw a series of cubes, and every cube that we draw, we're going to draw at that same 45-degree relationship to the picture plane. So every cube that we draw is going to be 45 degrees to the picture plane. So we'll draw a few of them. I'm just going to draw another couple right here. But it's very important that you understand that for this exercise. We'll build things off of the understanding we'll gain from this, but every cube that we draw will be at 45 degrees. And we're going to start with the same cube that we drew earlier, which is going to be one that is below the horizon line. Oh, you know what? Well, never mind. We're going to draw a cube that's below the horizon line, which means that I'll see the top surface, just like we saw in the exercise we did this morning. And we're going to draw it right on the vertical horizon line. So it's right on, it's drawing this cube right here. I'm looking right at it. And I'm going to give the leading edge of that cube, I'm going to make it somewhere 1.5 inches. That's the leading edge of that cube. Notice how I rotated my page, right? Setting that up optimal. It's a little bit darker. Notice that line's a little bit darker. It will be an object line. Now, what we did in the exercise this morning is we used the vanishing lines as a check to see if we were doing things correctly. But what I want you to do now is at the bottom and the top of this, this leading edge of this cube that we're going to draw a line out to the right vanishing point. We're going to do that for both of those. Now, I want you to also pay attention. Everybody look up at the screen for just a second, because a lot of people struggle to generate converging lines, right? Because they're very close to parallel. They're converging slightly, and some of them converge more, some of them converge less. But what I want you to do is notice what I do with my page when I move from drawing that one to drawing the next one. I not only move my page, but I rotate it a little bit. And sometimes, if I can develop this idea moving forward that I'm just reproducing this exact same line over and over and over again, and I'm just changing the orientation of my paper, I can create convergence by moving and rotating. Now I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to draw from those same 2 points over to my left vanishing point. These should be light lines, really as light as you can draw them. Okay, now is where that seared in image of the proportion of your cube should come in. So the challenge, really, at this point, I'm given this. These are the left and right vanishing point. Those can also be thought of as training wheels, right? They're giving me a place to converge to. But right now the challenge comes in. If this is the height of my cube, and a cube is defined as something where all the sides are equal, then how far do I need to come back to draw this other line in? And so that's why I'm going to reference this for just a second. Let's see, this relative to this. It's in the same situation. This is right on that vertical horizon line. So I'm going to rotate my page to set this up. And I'm going to make it a little bit thinner than I think it should be. I'm going to go about right there. That's the side of my cube. There's a couple of things I want you to think about. Well, I'll get into that in a minute. And then I can come over here and maybe estimate to do the same thing. So now I've drawn 2 sides of my cube. And then from this point and this point, I'm going to go find my vanishing points again. The second set of cubes you're going to draw without training wheels. You're going to draw them without vanishing points. And let me tell you what I've seen, again, in all the years that I teach this, the lines that people mess up on their cubes most often are these top 2 lines. And so notice it's difficult. It's so difficult. If all I'm doing is focusing right here, it's difficult to see that there's convergence there. But you want to make sure that there's convergence. I'm going to rotate my page again. I'm going to ghost in that line. I'm not going to draw it until I feel comfortable that I've got it right at the thing. And then there's my cube.
Jared's already said this, but just to re-emphasize it, draw the whole line every time, tip to tip. If you get the whole line wrong, do the whole line again. Don't do hairy lines, go back and forth, one whole line, just one whole line, one whole line, one whole line. Even if you get it wrong, come back over the whole line again. Keep those weights light, like he said. And again, don't look at the cube. You have to estimate that width and get the width of the cube, but try to hit those vanishing points and keep rotating your paper to keep your hand squared up in that natural motion that you need to do. So
Yeah. One thing that I did not say up until this point, you should be drawing lightly. These are construction lines. So what we want to do now is we want to differentiate between our object lines and our construction lines. And so I'm going to do that. If this is an area where if you so choose to start using tools at this point, you can. Right now I don't want you to do it on this exercise, but I'm going to go ahead and just go up. I'm applying a little bit more pressure, and I'm going to darken in my object lines to create contrast and differentiation between those construction lines and these lines. And you can go over it once. This is where, you know, also if you wanted to start using different pens, on this exercise, let's keep it with ballpoint, but this is where maybe you would go over those lines with a razor point, or you might go over it with a flare tip. Right now, I want you to create that differentiation just by applying more pressure or going over those lines more with your ballpoint pen. Okay, so here's where I want you to really start to pay attention. We're going to take notes on our drawing because there's a number of things I want you to pay attention to with regard to this cube. And hopefully I did them right. The first thing is, where is that cube relative to the horizon line, and where is it relative to the vertical horizon line? It's below the horizon line, and it's right on the vertical horizon, right? And it's at 45 degrees. So I'm going to point out a few things about this cube. I call these are Jared's 3 rules of cubes. So
3 rules of cubes? Is that what you said?
Trademark 2018.
All right, I want to hear this.
All right, so rule number 1 is thinking about these angles. Because I have my training wheels, I know that my angles, they should be right. But I'm looking at that angle relative to horizontal on my page, and I'm just going to hatch this in. These lines are so short that I don't mind doing a little hatch that's different from my optimal angle. Yes?
Should we draw these in?
Yeah, I want you to draw these in. If you do have different colored pens, go ahead. I'm doing this in red. If you don't worry about it. Just do this as construction lines. But red, I'm going to label this as 1. Rule number 1, or the one thing that I want to pay attention to, is the angle of my vanishing lines relative to horizontal on the page, relative to real horizontal on my page. So I'm going to call that angle of convergence. So up here, number 1, and we'll talk about how this changes, angle of convergence. I just wrote that up there. So you're this is an exercise, but you're also taking notes. Okay. The second thing, and notice what those angles are. The left angle and the right angle. What would you say their relationship to one another is? What? They're equal, right? And that's really defined simply because this sits in the middle of my page. It's equal distance from both of these vanishing points. So those angles should be equal. Those angles are equal everywhere in the middle of my cube, right? So that angle, if I move it up a little bit and I look at the angle there and I look at the angle there, those angles are all equal. So angle of convergence is one thing that you want to pay attention to. And if my cube sits on that vertical horizon line, those angles are equal if I'm drawing a cube. Okay, the second thing I want you to pay attention to is the rate of convergence. And what I mean by that is how quickly do these lines move towards one another. So the rate of convergence, and I'm doing that in blue. So we're going to call 2. Rule number 2 is to pay attention to the rate of convergence. And so how would the left side going towards the left vanishing point and the right side, what's their rate of convergence relationship? They're equal, right? That's easy. All these rules are fairly simple for this cube that sits in the middle of my page or sits on the vertical horizon line, and if it's at 45 degrees relative to me. Okay, so the third thing I want you to pay attention to, I'm going to extend, I'm going green now, I'm going to extend the sides. And remember, we talked about in 2-point perspective, all of our vertical lines, if it's vertical in real life, when I draw it, it should be vertical. And I'm going to put little dimension arrows right here. And what I'm referring to, or what I'm talking about here, is how much of the sides of these cubes that I see. It's at 45 degrees. It's right in front of me. It's right on that vertical horizon line. So I see the same amount of the right side as I see of the left side. So by extending this down, these two sizes should be different. And since I made this up, I'm going to call this rule the perceived size. When we start to move off of the vertical horizon line, these rules change. And so that's what we're going to do now. 2 was rate of convergence. Yes. Anybody have any questions so far? So the 3 things that I'm looking at is I'm looking at this angle. That's important. I'm looking at the rate of convergence, how quickly these 2 things come together. Compared the left side compared to the right side. And then the last thing, I'm looking at how much of the faces that I see. Okay, so I'm going to start a new cube. I'm going to put one over here. Somewhere, I'm going to try and draw it about the same size as that first one. But I'm going to move it up closer to the horizon line. It's still going to be all below the horizon line, but I'm going to put a cube right here. So there's my leading edge. So relative to everything, this is to the left of my vertical horizon line. It's below my horizon line. It's still at, if you come up here and look at this, it's still at a 45-degree angle relative to the picture plane. Okay, so I'm going to construct my cube the exact same way that I did earlier. I'm going to start with this leading edge. I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to ghost this in to my right vanishing point. I'm going to rotate my page. This one's going to be a little bit difficult, right? It's long. I'm going to do it again.
Can I butt in here for 1 second, Jared? One of the things we do a lot of here in this section is we draw through. Don't feel like you got to stop at the corner of your cube. Those vanishing lines that you're drawing can extend on beyond to the left or right of the vertical that you know you'll be putting in. That's totally okay. So don't feel like you got to stop on a dime with those, okay? Draw through your line. You're going to get better quality lines if you let your line pass through the point that you know you'll end up using later. Don't feel like you got to stop it right on the money.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to point out, I'm not drawing the sides of my cube yet, but I want you to start to look at rule number 1. So let's draw in just a real horizontal line, and let's look at this angle compared to this angle. What's happened? They're no longer equal, right? If I'm closer to the vanishing point, that angle is a steeper angle. The further away from the vanishing point I am, it's a shallower angle. And so that's a rule. It's going to be the opposite if I move over to this side. Does that make sense? This is a steeper angle. Because I'm closer to that vanishing point, that's a steeper angle than this shallower angle. And we'll use this. Right now, it's not overly important. It's being given to us. But when we start to create our own drawings and we start to establish views, these are the things that you need to think about when establishing, you know what, I want to draw this, what is it called again? This watchman, and I want to see more of the face that has the television on it when I draw it. These are the things that I need to think about when I set that drawing up. Okay, so let's look at, I'm going to come back to here. You don't need to draw this, but basically I'm drawing this cube, right? We drew this one. It's right in line with my vertical horizon. It's right in front of me. Now I'm drawing this one. And this is going to be an exaggeration. Let's say that I'm right here. But if I'm looking at this or I see this, notice what happens. I see a lot more, my picture plane, I see a lot more of this side of that cube than I see of this far side of the cube, right? So that's something that we want to think about when we begin to set this up. So, whereas this face, just to me, this is my own sense and my own feeling, that feels, it's almost difficult to force myself to draw a small enough face right there. Here, I want to make sure that this gets a little bit wider, and then on this side I see less, right? So the perceived size, my rule number 3 is going to be different, and I'm moving towards a square. So let me put a line in right there, and when we finish it, it'll feel a little bit differently. And then this one I'm going to see less. Okay? Look at your neighbors. Look at their lines. Look and see, does that look like a square? Now, thankfully, I already have a line coming through here that establishes that. I'm going to rotate my page over. I've got to get this all the way over to that left vanishing point. It's almost difficult to pull it all the way down. There's my cube. Let me darken this cube in, and we'll look at those 3 rules again. This is the difficult part. This is the proportion part, right? This is what comes with practice. It comes with time. It comes with, you know what? Does it look right? Well, if it doesn't look right, you know, you can actually just kind of start to change it a little bit. So let's look at those 3 rules. Let's talk about, we already talked about the angle, right? So we've talked about this angle. Well, let's look at the rate of convergence. How quickly these things converge. The left versus the right. So if I'm going towards the right vanishing point, is it converging faster or slower than going towards the left vanishing point? Participation encouraged. Yeah, it's going faster. It's got to get to that vanishing point a lot quicker, so it has to converge quicker. To get over to this left vanishing point, it doesn't have to converge very quickly because it's a long way away from it. So that's another thing we want to make sure that we think about when we set up drawings in the future. So the rate of convergence if I'm on the right side of the vertical horizon, then my rate of convergence is going to be quicker going towards the right. And then now let's look at the perceived size. How much of this do we see? And so just draw down those same really light construction lines. And look just how much more of this side that we see than this side, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I'm gonna put an overlay. Y'all sit back and watch for a second. I'm gonna screw this drawing up. I'm gonna show you how things look a little bit awkward, and then we're gonna look at some things that Michael did for us. So I'm just gonna take and I'm gonna trace this. Whoops. You don't need to do this. I'm just gonna show you.
People on the far outsides of the room can only see your paper when it's at the top of this view.
Up here?
Yeah. If it's down really far, they can see it as well.
Do me a favor. Can you find, I think back in there's a bunch of books. Will you bring me 3 books? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm getting my convergence right. The only thing I'm changing right now is how much of each side that I see. And so, you know, my guess is that doesn't look like a cube anymore, right? What is it? It's deeper going back towards the right. But let's look at that rule and let's see what happens if we don't pay attention to the perceived size. Okay, I may need 4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it here and take that off.
I think it's just the fact that people's heads are in the way if it's at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, I know.
Like-
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this whole thing this way, and I don't think I can do it with that. So, if I followed all those rules other than the perceived size, and I kept those sizes the same, that's no longer a cube, right? Everybody see that? It's difficult to show off the convergence rule incorrectly, but I'll show you at some point in the next couple of weeks. So,
Let me encourage everybody who's working, should be working on this real time in here. Let me encourage everybody to just keep fixing yours as you go. Too. I think there's a tendency that I just draw that cube and it's wrong. Maybe you realize after it's complete or after you move it to the next one, oh, it's too tall,
Put a piece of tape to
or
remind you
whatever.
every time to scoot it up or something like that.
Mhm.
Working over the top of it. Draw it again, measure off, leave the old lines there that are wrong and try to come in and fix the proportions, either adjusting the height or the width. You can come back and do that. It's like two different processes. Process one is getting the perspective and the vanishing lines going the right way and all of that. But process two is just hitting the proportions. And the proportions you can continue to adjust by adding more lines. And if you're working in construction lines, as you should be, before you darken it all in, it's not that big a deal to just make these adjustments on the fly. So don't feel like you're locked in. Keep fixing the one that may be not right.
yeah, and it's also, what's interesting about this is by going over these object lines, and this is one of the reasons why, again, I like ballpoint pen. By going over the object lines multiple times, if I start out light, so all this is a lot more challenging if you draw and you start those construction lines with too much pressure and they're too dark. It's difficult to make that differentiation and show that contrast between construction lines or object lines and construction lines are mistakes that you might have made. So I'm going to make a mistake on purpose. I'm going to draw another cube right here, very similar to this one. Essentially, think about maybe even just mirroring this cube over to the other side. The rules are exactly the same but opposite, right? As far as rate of convergence, as far as angle of convergence. All this is fairly simple. I'm just going to look and I'm going to, I don't have to be perfect with where this is, but there's my leading edge. I'm going to sketch a line back to there. It's difficult to come all the way across. You can see there's an arc popping into my vanishing line. Here, I'm going to create that. I'm going to put that there. And let's see what happens when I finish this up. Okay, so y'all help me out. Help me evaluate that. Is my proportion correct? What's wrong with it? My right face is too short. Okay, let me fix that. Does everybody see that? Visually, our brains are amazing in the way that they pick up on proportion. Okay, what else? Maybe this side is a little bit too deep. Okay. That feels much better. So now I'm going to darken it in. And what you'll notice,
I would almost say that it's actually really hard to get it right the first time. It's almost like, with me, even I end up correcting almost every one I do. It's like you get it, almost have to get it there to be able to estimate it, to shave it back off, or to add it back in. So, yeah, don't be shy about correcting after you draw on the cube. That's really
yeah, we're not going to count off for this on this exercise. If you make a correction, the one thing we would count off is if you maybe started too dark and there was no contrast between what you intended as your final object line and what you created as your test line. Okay? Yes. In fact, well, I tell you what, if you haven't done it yet, hold off. I don't need you to draw. Do the rules make sense? Do I even need to draw these rules and put the green and blue and red pen down? The rules are the exact opposite as they were here. I'm closer to the left vanishing point, therefore these have to converge a lot quicker to get there. The angle is steeper, the angle is shallower going towards the right, and we've already talked about the proportion. So let's do, I'm going to draw 2 more cubes. You can work along with me. We're going to draw a total of 7 cubes on this sheet of paper. So we're going to draw 3 above the horizon line, and we're going to draw 1 on the horizon line. I'm going to draw it a little off center. I'm going to put it right here. It's going to bridge that horizon line. How many faces of this cube will I see? It's right on the horizon line. Do I see the bottom of the cube? Do I see the top of the cube? All right, exactly. But my other rules are the same. In fact, my rules are exactly the same. My angle is shallower because I'm moved this thing over to the left side. This angle is shallower. That one's a little bit. This one's a little bit steeper. Because it's closer to that horizon line or on the horizon line, all of the angles are shallower. But which face of this cube will I see more of? The right face or the left face? The right side. So that rule, that perceived size, that rule is exactly the same. And in fact, it almost looks like it's right on that vertical horizon line. So I'll see more of that and less of this. That seems like it's maybe a little too much. So let me come in. So if it's on the horizon line, I don't see the top surface, I just see that edge, and I don't see the bottom surface, I just see the edge. Are you rotating your page? Everybody rotating their page? All right, I'm going to draw 1 more on the top, and then I'm going to let you finish. I'm going to make this one bigger. Let's just have fun. Let's make this larger. I want this cube to be above the horizon line, completely above the horizon line. So I'll see 3 surfaces again. What surfaces of the cube will I see?
Right, left, and the bottom.
Right, left, and now